West Baltimore to boil their water after E. coli is found in it over the weekend. We'll have an update later from the mayor. Meantime, the mayor says the contamination was found after routine testing and 24 more samples were collected last night. DPW will provide an update after those samples have been tested. Now, the Office of Emergency Management is giving bottled water to residents who need it. They passed out 172,000 bottles at 3 sites today. All 3 sites closed at 8 o'clock, but they'll reopen at 9 in the morning. The mayor's office says the source of the contamination isn't clear at this time. DPW says, for its part, it is not coming from wastewater treatment sites. The city health department is telling everyone to keep an eye out for symptoms of E. coli. That includes diarrhea, cramps, nausea, even fever. Well, tonight, more questions and answers about the situation, including the timeline for what the city knew and when they knew it, and how they shared that information with residents. We have team coverage tonight, starting with Amy Simpson.
In Jackson, Mississippi, where the governor has declared a state of emergency, telling residents don't drink the water. Already dealing with flooded streets, more than 100,000 people are left without reliable running water. The rain-battered state now dealing with devastating damage to its major pump at Jackson's main water treatment facility. ABC News' Trevor Ault is in Jackson with the latest.
People in Jackson, Mississippi are being told to expect little or no drinkable running water for an undetermined amount of time. The lieutenant governor saying the water and sewer system is at the brink of collapsing.
It means the city cannot produce enough water to fight fires, to reliably flush toilets.
All Jackson public schools now switching to virtual learning indefinitely. In some parts of the city, the fire department is finding no water in fire hydrants, instead relying on the supply on board trucks.
All of our units have 500 gallons of water on it, and the guys can use that water to sustain a lot of incidents.
The warnings come after a pump at the city's troubled water treatment facility was damaged.
It was a near certainty that Jackson would fail to produce running water sometime in the next several weeks or months. Unfortunately, that failure appears to have begun.
Jackson residents have already been under boil water notices since last month when water samples found harmful contaminant levels, making matters worse. Flooding from the Pearl River cresting Monday just below major flood stage.
You can see for yourself, River Road looks like a river this morning. This neighborhood is completely underwater.
Violent threat lurking where you'd least expect it, in our drinking water. We assume, of course, it's safe, but scientists are warning about a common and potentially dangerous chemical that can survive in the ground and in our water forever. On a cold winter day, on the Stone Ridge Dairy Farm in Arundel, Maine, Fred Stone was more worried about his cows being cold than himself, especially his prized brown Swiss, named Blue.
She likes to give me a hard time as much as she can.
Fred and his wife Laura are only the latest generation to work this dairy. It's been in the family for over a century. But since November of 2016, every drop of milk, that white gold that's been a reliable livelihood for generations, is now being poured right down the drain.
That's a hell of a waste. Even I can't drink it.
He had no idea the wastewater that the state licensed him to use to fertilize his fields was also swimming with potentially toxic chemicals called PFAS. Now, his land, his cows, and yes, their milk, are all contaminated.
Have you ever heard of PFAS or any of these chemicals?
Never.
A lot of people haven't. PFAS is an acronym for a family of man-made compounds called per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. The CDC has listed a host of health effects believed to be associated with exposure to those chemicals, including cancer, liver damage, increased cholesterol, and a lot more. The chemicals are so highly mobile, they're not only being found in soil and groundwater, but in the atmosphere too. In fact, they've even been detected in raindrops falling in some of the most remote areas of the world.
This story is about a new plastic material trademarked Teflon.
PFAS chemicals have been around for decades.
Oh, good thing it's Teflon.
DuPont was the first to use PFAS in Teflon, giving us those non-stick pots and pans.
Half of this piece of carpet has been treated with this new finish. The other half has not.
3M used a different PFAS in its once popular fabric protector, Scotchgard. Today, those chemical cousins can still be found in almost anything designed to fend off oil or water or grease. That includes things like pizza boxes, paper plates, rain jackets, ski wax, even guitar strings. PFAS are basically impossible to escape, and scientists say they are likely here to stay.
They are nearly indestructible.
You just can't get rid of them.
You can't get rid of them.
Patrick McRoy, the former deputy director of the advocacy group Defend Our Health in Maine, explains just why that staying power is so very troubling.
A lot of chemicals, when they go into your body or when they end up in the environment, they break down, they slowly decompose. PFAS don't do that. Once you put PFAS somewhere, it's going to stay there practically forever.
That means the levels of these so-called forever chemicals can build up and linger in our bloodstreams forever.
How high were your levels when they told you about your water?
They're supposed to be under 40 parts per trillion.
Yeah.
Ours is 26,000.
26,000
per trillion. Yep.
I know.
Kathy and Bruce Harrington, who live next to a farm, were notified by Maine's Department of Environmental Protection that their drinking water was tainted with PFAS. The likely source was 2 industrial plants not far away.
Your well is right there.
Yep. Well is right there. They come and tested our water and they said, we'll send you a report in a couple of weeks or whatever. And they called us in a few days and they said, do not drink your water, don't use it for cooking, nothing.
All for what? Asks Bruce.
Bottom line is we don't need freaking eggs to slide out of pans versus people dying.
PFAS contamination is really a national crisis, and the real scale of contamination is staggering. The more we test, the more we find it.
Melanie Benish, legislative attorney at the Environmental Working Group in Washington, says thousands of sites nationwide are polluted with PFAS, and she lays the blame for that growing crisis squarely at the feet of the companies who invented the chemicals in the first place.
It is the manufacturers like DuPont and 3M who have gotten us here today. So they've known for 70 years that they were poisoning the water, and they didn't tell the EPA, they didn't tell their neighbors, they didn't tell their workers, they didn't tell anyone because they were making too much money.
In the last 2 decades, thousands of lawsuits have been brought against the manufacturers for allegedly knowing PFAS chemicals were dangerous. While most deny they did anything wrong, settlement offers have been pouring in to the tune of billions of dollars. But Benish says the manufacturers aren't the only ones to blame.
There has also been regulatory failure. The FDA, new in the 1960s, the Department of Defense, new in the 1970s, the EPA has known since at least the 90s, and they didn't treat the issue with the amount of urgency that it needed.
Regulating